Hello, my name is Jessica Lomelin, and you're listening to No Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet. Today's episode is called From the Root de la Raíz, and basically what this episode is going to be about is knowing a little bit more about me and getting to know me in a more transparent way, and understanding why this project came about, the title behind it, and just in reality, like what pushed me to do this. So settle in, get comfortable, as we're going to dive into a little bit about me, a little bit about my background and stuff. So grab your coffee, grab your beer, your glass of wine, whatever you need to do. Get comfortable. As I say it in Spanish, we're going to start to chismear a little bit about me and everything. So let's get ready. All right. So before I can get into who really Jessica is, I first have to talk about my roots. That's why I picked this title. And before I can speak about me, I will start about my parents and a little bit about them. So both of my parents are from Mexico, from a town named Puebla and also Mexico City. And I've always said that I have both of those different cultures in my blood. I have always loved Mexico. I try and go every year. And ever since I was little, my parents always encouraged me to travel and visit the family, as the majority of my family is in Mexico. I really don't have any family here in the US. So I've always connected in a very passionate way when it came to the culture of my parents, and I really appreciate the culture, the language, everything that Mexico is about. And I've always been really impacted by our culture and stuff, and as I was growing up, but the language has always been Spanish. And yeah, up until this day, that's all we talk at home. However, because of that, and since I was always spoken that in Spanish, I always did struggle when it came to school. From like kindergarten to fourth grade, I always spoke Spanish at home. So I was always in classes that were either Spanish or bilingual because I was having a really difficult time understanding English. And because of that, I also did get a lot of bully with different students in the classroom. And I remember there was times where they would talk between each other and stuff, and I would approach them, and then they would make comments like, oh no, we can't talk to her because she doesn't understand English, and they would just giggle. And I remember at that age that it did hurt, and I was like so confused of like why they were treating me differently. And now that I look at it, it was like they were also Mexican, from a Mexican descent, and it was like, wow, like my own people are being such bullies to me. But that's how I was. And then eventually in fifth grade is when I just, out of nowhere, I kind of snapped into it and I was able to understand English. And I remember my parents were also so concerned that I didn't understand English and I wasn't able to speak it properly. So they did ask a therapist of like what was happening, like how can they help me and stuff. And the therapist, I remember, mentioned something like, don't worry about it. Make sure that you just teach your daughter like the correct Spanish, and like you're gonna realize that one day out of the blue, she's gonna be able to speak English and just able to speak it and understand it. And I think that was like really powerful that I was able to now speak both languages, and that has truly opened a lot of doors for me and giving me opportunities being able to say that I'm bilingual. So I definitely thank my parents a lot for really teaching me how to speak Spanish. I may not speak it perfectly, but I think I'm able to communicate very well and people are able to understand. So that was also why it was very important for me to do this podcast, not only in English, but also in Spanish for my communities that are Spanish speakers, so they are able to connect with everything that I'm going to share during this podcast.
Eventually, my parents migrated from Mexico to the US, my dad being the first one in 1985.
And then my mom came in 1994.
I was actually born here in the US in a suburb that is about like an hour and a half from Chicago, that it's called Elgin. And I've always been raised with the Mexican culture. I was never raised American. So a lot of people always kind of said, well, you act very Mexican. And I was like, what do you mean you act so Mexican? Like, how do you even act so Mexican? So, a lot of people always had things to say and stuff because they've said you always speak Spanish. You're always into Spanish music. You're always into like the Mexican food and this and that. I've never seen it as a problem. I think that it's great that I can, incorporate all that Mexican culture I was raised with.
So now fast forward to high school. I graduated at the age of 17 with my high school diploma. From there, at a young age, I always knew that I wanted to go to school, to go to college and stuff, and have a career. That was one of the things my parents always motivated me to do. However, I never knew what career I wanted. I also didn't know how to navigate schooling and stuff, from applying to financial aid to scholarships, determining what classes I had to take, and just really navigating all the school stuff. And I remember that was the first time I ever felt alone. I felt different. I felt like I didn't belong, and I just didn't know how to go about it. And I remember that I would tell myself, I'm like, I know there's other people that are probably on the same boat, being the first generation, being the first out of the family to graduate at high school, and now going into college and stuff and navigating all of that. And I knew there was other people like me that had parents and migrated to the US for a better future for their kids, that Spanish might have been the language at home and stuff. But I just didn't know how to connect. And I remember that I would say like a podcast or a YouTube channel would be so helpful, because then I wouldn't feel so alone navigating all of this.
But I've never found it. I was never able to find either a YouTube channel or a podcast where I would be able to relate and hear someone say like, yeah, I've been through all of that, or I was going through that at some point in life, and kind of figuring out how they navigated all of that. So again, I was kind of like lost and not understanding like how to go about life. But eventually I found my ways and stuff. I ended up graduating from community college, and I got my associates in arts. And I was also dealing with the misconceptions and people talking about community college. I remember there were students and even friends at that time that would say like, oh, you're going to go to a community college and you're not going to a 4-year university. And I remember I would be like, well, no, I'm not. Like, what's the big deal if I don't? And they would say comments like, oh no, you're not going to get great education if you go to a community college. Or even people said like, oh no, if you go to a community college just because you're poor. And I remember, and I was like, yeah, I am poor. Like, I can't afford college. And my parents cannot afford a 4-year university because going to school is expensive, and I don't have the money. Therefore, that's the way that I'm going to do it. So, yep, I ended up going to community college. I was like, all right, so what's next? Like, what is my next goal in life? And I always knew that I did want to go to a 4-year, but I was going to start in a community college. And I was between wanting to be a bilingual teacher or being a social work. And I kept going back and forth, because at the beginning I wanted to do bilingual education, because I said this is probably a way that I can connect a lot with students that possibly were struggling or are struggling with English as their second language, just the way that I was doing it when I was younger. So I thought I was going to connect that way. But then at the same time, I also wanted to do social work because I always had a passion for it. And it all really started thanks to my mom, because she would always sign me up or have me volunteer in different organizations that were asking for assistance. And I remember that I started at a very young age, when I was actually 12 or 13. And well, I couldn't say anything, because all she said was, this is where you're going to spend your time in either summer break or whenever you have some downtime or you don't have anything to do, you're going to be here at the nonprofit. And I remember that I would tell her like, I have other things to do, Mom. I could totally hang out with friends and do stuff, but you want me to stay inside and be at a nonprofit. And I just didn't know why. Like, why was I doing all of this? But you can never fight your mom or argue with them. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to do it. And she would just tell me like, yeah, you're going to enjoy it. Trust me, you're going to learn a lot. And yeah, I just started doing it at a very young age. And so I did a little bit of everything when I was at the agencies, from doing events, from doing paperwork. I was also translating certain documents, finding resources for family. So it encouraged me to pursue the social work field, because I feel like because of this, it actually gave me more passion to do this work, because I saw the need for it in the communities. So this is something that I'm always going to be grateful that I actually got exposed to it at a very young age, because I feel like if maybe I wasn't exposed to it, maybe I never would have actually done social work in the first place. I was like, okay, so now you're going to tell me why Like, what was the reason behind me doing all of this? Because I know that you just don't give me stuff just for the heck of it. There has to be a reason and a purpose for it. So what is it? And she honestly just said, like, when we migrated to the US, we needed a lot of help. We didn't know the language. We didn't know the rules. We just didn't know anything. So we worked with a lot of agencies that really helped us. And remember that at a young age, you were always our translator. You were always the one going to different meetings with us when we didn't know how to ask for something. Like at McDonald's, you were the one asking for the food. You were the ones reading the letters that arrived home because we didn't know the language. So we knew that you were always been so helpful to us that we wanted you to see that and for you to keep helping the community because we knew the need in the community. So that just really opened my eyes, and that conversation was very close to heart whenever I spoke to my mom about it. And I was like, wow, like now it makes sense why I did it. So that's something that I'm always going to be thankful for them to exposing me to all of that, because I feel like if I wasn't exposed at a young age, I probably wouldn't have seen it. I wouldn't have seen the need, and maybe I would have taken a different route in my career. So I do thank them a lot for having me do all of that. So then eventually I concluded that I wanted to do social work. So now I was again going through that cycle of navigating how to go into the university, what school to go for, at the same time how to not feel so alone and stuff. Because my parents were always supportive, like 100% of the time. They always told me like, hey, you got this, hon. Like, you got this. Like, don't get discouraged. You're going to be able to accomplish anything that you set your mind to. And I knew I was going to be able to do all of that, but it was just hard because I knew that they wanted to help me so much. But again, they didn't know the language. They didn't know the procedures and like the rules and stuff. So all they could say was like, hey, you got this and stuff. And again, it was like a very scary time for me just because I didn't know how to navigate all of that. And again, it's when I said like, why doesn't this podcast or a YouTube channel exist? Because I would make me feel so much better being able to connect with someone that was going through the same thing that I was. But again, I didn't find anything like that. So then I was like, okay, so you keep saying you want something like that, right, Jessica? So then why don't you just do it? Because apparently nobody's going to do it. So just do it, right? And I was like, all right, how hard can it be? Let me do it. Let me brainstorm ideas and stuff. And I did start to brainstorm, and I put it in my to-do list. But, you know, as you can see, it never got accomplished. I kind of just put a pause on it and said, like, I'll get back to it whenever I can. Certain things happen in life and stuff that I will be discussing in other episodes. And yeah, I never did it. I just put it on a to-do list and kind of moved on with life. But I always saw the need for it. So finally this year I said, you know what? You're done making excuses. You're going to do it because you've always said this is a dream for you to do. So you need to stop just putting it aside and really get to it. So yeah. So this year I said this is a year that I'm going to do it. And I started brainstorming on how to go about it. And then yeah, so I've always said that this is something that I feel like is going to connect with other individuals. I feel like it's not a podcast that it's your regular ones that you hear. It's going to be really just authentic and things that happened in my life and things that might have happened to others, and just overall how we're navigating life, how we got through it and stuff, and just kind of going from there. And it's going to be a place where there's going to be no judgment, and just a place where you can be yourself and feel like you're being heard and stuff. And that's what I really hope the podcast can do. And well, eventually I had to come up with a title, when I said, okay, I want a title that can not only connect with individuals, but it's actually important to me and it's something that I stand by. So I put No Me Callo, I won't stay quiet, because if you know me and what I do, I'm always fighting and advocating for those that are in need, for those that sometimes have been silent due to whatever their situation it is, whether it's like human trafficking, whether it's domestic violence, just overall anything that they're dealing with. I've always been a person who is advocating for anyone and everyone, because that's something that just irritates me and it gets me really going and stuff. And I've always said that if you stay quiet or you don't say anything or you look the other way, you're being part of the problem and you're not helping anyway. So I've always said that it's a sin for you to be quiet. And that's one of the things that I never shut up. I'm going to fight and I'm going to argue, regardless of who the person is or what system it is. I'm always going to be advocating. And well, every episode is going to be very different just because I'm going to be discussing different topics, including human trafficking, mental health, domestic violence, abuse, first generation, being a leader, and maybe you're younger than others, as well as what it feels like to have a position where it's more dominant when it comes to men and you're a woman in those type of positions. So a little bit of everything. It's going to be conversations that might not be that easy to have or to listen to, but they're conversations that I've said that it's important to have. And just overall, it's conversations that we have to do. We can't step looking the other way. We have to really sit down and just talk. I am going to have different episodes covering a bunch of different stuff, and as well in different episodes I might be talking about certain things or certain resources, so I will be adding those in the description of every episode just in case you want them or you want to share them with others. You can find them in the description of that episode as well. You will also not be hearing from me in every episode. You might be hearing from other guest speakers that I will have, that I'm going to invite. And they might be survivors, they might be family or friends or professionals in the field. It depends on the topic. But they're going to be individuals that are willing to share their story, willing to share what they've navigated in life and how they're going about it, resources and stuff that might be helpful. But everybody that comes and speaks is going to be coming with an open heart, knowing that this is going to be a no judgment zone, as well, just to be openly willing to just talk about the things that they've been through. So I will also be putting my email in the description of the podcast and in the episode, so you can send me an email if you are interested in sharing your story, your challenges, how life has been, anything that might be relevant to us. Let me know. Send me an email. Would be happy to have anybody who's, again, just willing and talk to us and be transparent. So let me know if you're interested in that. As well, I will be posting new episodes every Friday. The next one is this Friday, and it's called Ni de aquí y ni de allá, neither from here nor from there. And it's going to be a conversation where I'm just going to open up and truly say how it was definitely so hard for me to just navigate two different worlds. Navigating the whole, you're not Mexican enough, you're not American enough, or you're too Mexican, and not knowing what that meant. And it was definitely frustrating. I struggled a lot, not knowing where I was fitting in, because I didn't know how to be both. And I didn't know if it was okay to be both. So I will definitely be very honest. That's one thing you're going to get out of this podcast is I am very transparent, very direct, and I don't really care what others have to say at this point. So expect very raw conversations, a lot of honesty. And if you like that, well, then you're at the right podcast. But yeah, so again, just whenever you come in and listen, make sure you come comfortable, grab your beer, your glass of wine, your water, your soda, whatever you got to do, just come in, listen, and remember that I'm just going to be honest and I'm just going to say what I have to say. So you already know my name, Jessica Lomelin, and you were listening to No Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet. Until next time.